He read the message twice before he smiled. It was the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Practiced, slow, the smile of a man who has been waiting a long time for a specific moment and is finally holding it in his hands. Marcus had sent the confirmation through his assistant. 3 words. She's coming. Thursday. And Damien set his phone face down on the desk, the way you set down a winning hand before anyone else at the table has shown their cards. The invitation had been his idea from the start. His company's 10-year anniversary gala. Black tie, the Fairmont in downtown Toronto. A guest list that read like a who's who of Bay Street and beyond. He had planned every detail himself, including the detail that no one else knew about. He had sent a card to Osei-Crawford Consulting Group, addressed personally to its founder and CEO. He had written the note in his own hand, which he never did. We've come a long way since the beginning. I think it's only right that you be there to see it. What he did not write, but what he meant, was this. Look at what I built without you. Look at who I became. He had been married to Temi for 9 years. 9 years during which she had worked late and said little and understood, in a way that no one else seemed to, exactly how his mind operated. She had come from nothing, a rented room in Scarborough, a mother who worked double shifts at a textile factory, a scholarship to York that she had earned twice over. She was the one who had found the gap in the enterprise software market when he was still talking in circles at the kitchen table. She was the one who had restructured his early pitch deck at 2 a.m. and sent it without asking for credit. She was the one who had flagged the liability clause in the first investor contract that would have cost him controlling interest before the company even launched. He had signed the divorce papers on a Tuesday in February. By the following Friday, he was photographed at a charity dinner with Ingrid, a woman 11 years younger than him who had very good posture and no opinions about enterprise software. The divorce had been clean. Temi had not contested the terms. She had taken what the lawyers offered, shaken hands with no expression, and walked out of the building without looking back. People who knew them both said she seemed fine. Damien had told his friends that she would land somewhere. He had said it with the specific generosity of a man who has already moved on and is offering kindness from a safe distance. He had not kept track of where she landed. He had not needed to. That was 4 years ago. Temi Osei had not cried in the car on the way home from the lawyer's office. She had thought about it, had felt the pressure of it behind her sternum, the specific weight of 9 years condensing into an afternoon. And then she had rolled down the window on the highway and let the February air come in cold and sharp, and she had felt, beneath the grief and the silence, something else. Something thin and quiet and stubborn, but that she would not have had a word for then. But that she would later come to recognize as clarity. She had rented a 1-bedroom in the Annex and spent the first 3 weeks walking. Not therapeutically, not with a podcast, just walking. Through Kensington Market and along Bloor, and down through Trinity Bellwoods at 7 a.m. when the dog walkers were out. And the city felt almost manageable. Because she was thinking through a problem. She had always thought better when she was moving. The problem was not the divorce. The problem was that she had spent 9 years making someone else's company work and had nothing on paper that proved it. She had no title. She had no equity stake. She had functioned, for nearly a decade, as the thinking behind a man who got all the credit for the thinking. She registered Osei-Crawford Consulting Group in March. By May, she had her first client, a mid-sized logistics company in Mississauga that had been losing money on its warehouse management software for 2 years and couldn't figure out why. She figured out why in 6 days. They referred her to 3 other companies. By December of that first year, she had a waiting list. She did not think about Damien very often. When she did, it was the way you think about a country you've left. Not with longing, just with the occasional involuntary recognition of how differently you see things now that you're on the other side. She hired her first full-time employee the following spring. By year 3, she had 22 people and a floor in a building on King Street West. By year 4, She had closed a partnership with two of the largest municipal infrastructure firms in the country and was in early conversations with a federal procurement office that made her assistant, a meticulous young man named Arthur, physically jump up from his chair when the meeting invite came through. She was in that meeting when Arthur slid the card across her desk on a Wednesday afternoon. Cream-colored envelope, personal handwriting she recognized immediately. She read it once and set it down. Arthur watched her face. "Do you want me to decline?" she thought for a moment. "No," she said. "Send a confirmation." She went back to her notes. Arthur waited. "That's all," she said. The Fairmont on that Thursday evening looked the way it always did when money had been involved in the planning. Chandeliers that caught the light, white arrangements taller than a person, a string quartet, playing something you recognized but couldn't name. The guests arrived in the particular way that people arrive when they want to be seen arriving. Slowly, with pauses. Damien stood at the center of the room in a midnight blue suit that had cost more than some people's monthly rent and shook hands and laughed at things that weren't quite funny. He was good at this. He had always been good at this. Ingrid stood beside him in a dress the color of champagne, and she was lovely and attentive and smiled whenever he smiled. He watched the door between conversations. He had imagined this moment for months. Not obsessively. He was not a man who would have described himself as the type, but consistently. He had imagined her walking in, looking at the room, looking at everything he had built, and understanding at last that what he had given her was not enough to hold him. That he had outgrown the version of himself she had known. He had rehearsed, once or twice, the expression he would wear. Gracious, untroubled, magnanimous. Temi arrived at 8:20. She was not alone. The two people who came in with her were not bodyguards in the conventional sense. They weren't in matching suits, weren't wearing earpieces, weren't scanning the room with the visible performance of security. They were simply two people who moved with a particular, unhurried competence, flanking her without hovering. One of them, a tall woman with close-cropped hair, spoke briefly with the events coordinator near the door. The other stood slightly to Temi's left and said nothing. What drew the attention was not the entourage. It was Temi herself. She wore midnight green, a structured gown that sat at the intersection of corporate and impeccable, the kind of choice that communicates that you did not dress for this room, you dressed for yourself. Her hair was natural and pinned up at the crown with a simplicity that took considerable skill to achieve. She was not smiling as she entered. She was looking at the room the way you look at a map you've already memorized. A woman near the bar, the kind of woman who knows everyone and is known by everyone, touched her husband's arm and said quietly, "Is that Temi Osei-Crawford?" Her husband glanced over. "The Osei-Crawford Group? The federal infrastructure contract?" "Yes," the woman said. She was still watching. I didn't know she and Damien knew each other. Across the room, Damien had seen her. He had not expected this. He had expected someone diminished, not outwardly perhaps, not literally, but in the way that people who have been left tend to carry that leaving somewhere visible. A certain carefulness, a particular way of entering a room as though checking first to see if they're allowed. He had expected the version of Temi that would make his success legible as a contrast. This woman was not a contrast. She was a parallel. He recovered quickly. He was good at that too. He moved toward her with a smile that only a person who knew him well would have recognized as slightly off-tempo. "Temi," he said, "I'm glad you came." She looked at him with an expression that was entirely composed and entirely neutral. "Congratulations on 10 years," she said. "Thank you." He glanced, almost involuntarily, at the two people with her. "Friends? Colleagues," she said simply. She accepted a glass of water from a passing tray, not champagne, and looked past him at the room with the quiet attention of someone who has arrived at a meeting and is waiting for it to begin. He said several more things. She responded to each of them with a brevity that was not rudeness and not warmth. It was simply efficiency, the neutrality of a person who has nothing to prove and therefore nothing to perform. He excused himself eventually to greet other guests. As he moved away, he was aware of something that he would not have admitted to feeling, but that sat in him uneasily for the rest of the hour, the distinct sensation of having miscalculated. The dinner was served at 9. Temi was seated, as the seating chart had placed her, at a table on the outer perimeter of the room. A table for less central guests. A placement that was not accidental. She did not adjust her expression when she found her name card. She sat down and introduced herself to the couple beside her, a man named Gordon, who ran a construction firm, and his wife, a woman in silver who taught environmental law at U of T. They talked easily. Temi had always been able to talk to anyone. What she had not anticipated, and this, she would think later, was the one thing she should have, was the speech. Damien gave the speech at 10:15 from a low stage at the front of the room. It was polished and personal and funny in the places where it was supposed to be funny, and it covered, in broad and grateful strokes, the story of the company. The early days, the difficult first year, the investor who had believed in him when no one else had, the team that had made everything possible. He did not mention her. Not obliquely, not in passing, not in the careful way that people sometimes mention things they want to mention without appearing to mention them. He did not say I had help, or I didn't do this alone, or even there were people in those early years without whom none of this would exist. He gave the history of the company as though it had begun in his own mind, fully formed, and the rest had simply been execution. Gordon's wife leaned slightly toward Temi and said, quietly, without making it a scene, "Was that accurate?" Temi looked at the stage. Damien was accepting applause. "It was selective," she said. She said it without edge. It was the most devastating thing she said all evening, and she said it in a voice low enough that only the woman beside her could hear. The miscalculation that Damien had sensed earlier in the evening became harder to ignore as the night continued. He had planned the invitation as a demonstration. He had envisioned a woman who would arrive and see his success and feel in some irrevocable and unspoken way the weight of what she had lost. He had not planned for the reality that had instead materialized. A woman who moved through his event like someone who had attended more impressive ones, who talked with his guests as though she had known them longer than he had, and who had, at some point during the cocktail hour, been pulled into a quiet conversation near the far end of the room with a man named Prescott, who managed a private equity group out of Calgary, and who had been trying to get into the federal procurement space for 3 years. Damien noticed because Prescott had been on his own list. The kind of relationship he had been cultivating for 2 years, carefully, the way you cultivate anything that requires patience. He noticed because the conversation lasted 45 minutes, and because when it ended, Prescott handed Temi something, a card, a folded note he couldn't see, and Temi received it without surprise. His communications director, a quick and loyal man named Brendan, appeared at his elbow at 11. "She's the one with the federal infrastructure deal," Brendan said, not as a question. "Yes," Damien said. "Prescott knows that." Damien said nothing. "Half the room knows that," Brendan added. He said it the way people say things they feel obligated to say. "She's apparently been in talks with the Federal Procurement Office since January. It's a very large contract." Damien looked across the room. Temi was standing with Gordon and his wife and a woman he didn't recognize, and she was laughing, a real laugh, sudden and unguarded, the kind that you cannot manufacture. And the people around her were laughing too, with the easy quality of people who are genuinely glad to be in a conversation. He had built this room. He had planned every arrangement, approved every dish, curated every guest list. And in the middle of it, without trying, without anything resembling effort, she had become the most interesting person in it. This was not what he had intended. This was not, in fact, anything he had prepared for. He found her near the end of the evening, just before midnight, on the terrace that overlooked the city. She was alone, or as alone as she ever seemed to be. Her 2 colleagues were visible through the glass doors, talking to each other without appearing to watch her, though Damien suspected they were. The city was spread below them, the particular way Toronto looks at night from a height, comprehensible, vast, lit up in a way that suggests more order than there actually is. "You built something," he said. He had not meant it as an apology. He had not entirely intended it to come out the way it did, with something under the surface, something that was not quite regret, but was adjacent to it. Temi looked at the city. "I did," she said. There was a silence that he did not fill. He had spent the entire evening filling silences with charm, with anecdote, with the practiced fluency of a man who has learned that confidence sounds like the absence of pause. But standing here with the city below them and her looking at it without needing him to explain anything, he found that he had run out of the specific language he'd prepared. "I thought," he began, and then stopped. She turned to look at him. It was a direct look, unhurried, the look of a person who has made a decision long before the moment requiring the decision arrived. "I know what you thought," she said. "That's all right." She said it without cruelty. This was the thing he had not accounted for. That she would be gracious, not forgiving exactly, not the kind of gracious that's performing generosity from a position of superiority, just settled. The graciousness of someone who has genuinely moved past something and has no investment in the fact that the other person hasn't. "The speech," he said. She waited. "I should have." He stopped. "You were there. From the beginning." "I know," she said. "I should have said it." She looked at him for a moment, not coldly, not warmly, with the particular quality of attention she had always given to things that mattered just enough to deserve a real response. Then she turned back to the city. "Yes," she said, "you should have." She did not say it to wound him. She said it because it was true, and because she was done with the habit of making things comfortable that were not comfortable. She had spent 9 years in that habit. She had left it behind with other things she no longer needed. He stood there for another moment. There was nothing more to say, and they both knew it. "Good night, Damien," she said. She said it the way you say good night to someone you once knew well and no longer know at all, with the faint formality of history between two people who are no longer in the same story. She found Arthur waiting for her in the lobby. He handed her her coat, without being asked, which he was very good at. "How was it?" he said. "Fine," she said. Prescott seemed pleased. "He did," she said. She was putting on her coat, her attention somewhere else already. On tomorrow's schedule, on the debrief call with the federal office at 8, on the clause in the partnership agreement that she had asked legal to look at again before Friday. "He wants to meet next week," Arthur said. "I'll send you the calendar options." "Good," she said. They walked out through the main entrance. The February air was cold and clear. A different February than the one 4 years ago. The same city, but a different way of moving through it. Her car was waiting at the curb. The driver, a quiet man who had been with her since the second year, opened the door without fanfare. She got in. Arthur got in the other side. The car pulled away from the Fairmont. Through the window, the hotel receded, the lit entrance, the valets in their dark coats, the soft geometry of the evening folding itself back into the city. She watched it for a moment and then looked away. She had a document open on her phone. The federal contract, the revised clause, 47 pages that required her full attention before morning. She put on her reading glasses and she began to read. The city moved past the window the way it always did at night. Building by building, block by block, familiar and ongoing. A streetcar crossed an intersection. A light changed. Somewhere above the lake, a plane descended slowly toward the airport, its lights blinking in the dark. She did not think about the speech. She did not think about Damien, or Ingrid, or the particular smile he had worn when she walked in, the one he thought she hadn't seen. She thought about the clause. She thought about the call at 8. She thought about a problem she had been turning over for a week, a structure problem in the partnership model, and as the car turned onto the highway and the city opened up around them into something larger and less defined, the answer came to her, the way answers always came. Not with fanfare, not at a desk, but quietly, in motion, between one thing and the next. The highwayed it down. She kept reading. The highway was nearly empty. The driver kept his speed steady and said nothing, which she appreciated. Arthur had fallen asleep against the window, which she also appreciated. Outside, The lake was invisible in the dark, though she knew it was there. Wide and indifferent and permanent, the way the best things are, she thought. I have work to do. And that for her was more than enough.